and welcome to my channel, Babbling Books. Thank you so much for clicking on my video. This is my second one. I posted my first one last night where I talked about my top 10 books from last year, and now I'm going to do my January wrap-up. January was a weird sort of hodgepodge month for me when it came to reading. My family got really sick with this virus. Thank God it wasn't COVID or anything like that, but we were all just sort of in a funk. I mostly listened to audiobooks. Every time I tried to read, I would get a really bad headache. So other than watching movies with my family, I listened to audiobooks and just laid in bed. So the first series that I want to talk about is I read books 1 through 6 of the Aurora Teagarden series. Now, interestingly, we came across these on the Hallmark Channel and we watched them, and I realized that they were based off of a book series. So I got some from the library, and they were quite a bit different than the movies. The whole series to me only rated about a 2.5 or a 3-star rating. They're categorized as cozy mysteries, but I found that to be slightly misleading. So if you're familiar with Joanne Fluke's series about the baker who solves mysteries, that's a cozy mystery to me. This series focuses more on Aurora Teagarden's personal life and the mystery that's happening in her town, and it's usually, of course, started with a murder. In the first book, Aurora actively pursues solving this mystery. In the second book, she does not at all. It just sort of unfolds around her, and we hear about it from other people. I don't see how that's can be categorized as a cozy mystery. But I'd already checked out books 1 through 4 from the library, so I just kept going because I did not feel like doing any research to find something else. And in the rest of the series, she is a little bit more active, but it is not as much as you would expect. But it kept my attention, and, it kept me from focusing on how bad I felt, so it did its job. But I can't say that I really highly recommend these because I really don't think they're that good. Now, I did start book 7 last night, and you probably want to know why I would keep going when I don't really recommend them. Well, the answer to that is that last night, book 6, at the end of it, it had this massive curveball. And I wanted to find out what happened, so I got the next book. Now, after book 7, I'm probably not going to read any more of these, but we'll see. So, after that, I had checked a book out from the library called Sons of Valor by Andrews and Wilson. So, this is a military action book. It focuses on a SEAL team. The main character is Chunk Redman, and Chunk is his nickname. And it's very action driven. It's told in the third person, and the perspectives alternate between Chunk Redman and the bad guy, the terrorist. I really, really enjoyed this. If you like the show SEAL Team, the one with David Boreanaz, if you like the TV show The Unit, that is a lot like this book. Now, this is only book 1. None of the other ones have been published yet, which is very disappointing to me. As I was reading this, though, I started to suspect that I was missing something, and come to find out I was. This is a spin-off series from another series. So, of course, I had to get that series. I ended up listening to books 1, 2, and 3 of this series here. It's called the Tier 1 series by the same authors. Now, what's interesting to note is that these authors are both Navy veterans. One of them is an atomic, I think that's how you say it, and it was on an atomic submarine. And the other one is a trauma surgeon who actively worked with the SEALs. Now, as a civilian, I don't really feel that I am qualified to say how accurate these books are, the portrayal of the SEALs and what they do. But I would think that based on the history of the authors, that these must be pretty accurate. I certainly found them to be realistic. I didn't really think anything was outlandish in them. But what I will say is that I found this series, coming from their other series, Sons of Valor, to this original series, I found this original series to be slightly disappointing. But I think that is just 100%, just due to myself, not the authors. This book starts out with a SEAL team, and it's got a lot of action in it. Then this catastrophic event occurs in book 1, and it completely derails the main character, Jack Kemper. It derails his life. He goes from being a SEAL team leader, a door kicker, as the SEALs refer to themselves. He goes from being, active combat to joining this team that operates entirely in the black. And they only answer to like the president and the vice president of the United States. But what was sort of jarring to me was that this team is entirely made up of like CIA spies and NSA analysts and hackers, very like more intelligence group rather than door kickers. So you're experiencing this dissatisfaction with Jack Kemper's dissatisfaction with his new team because they're not door kickers. And he himself is no longer doing active combat. He's now doing what he refers to as spooky CIA spy shit. And I found that as just as dissatisfying as Jack Kemper found it dissatisfying. Now, as the series progresses, there's more action. You start to get to know the other characters. So as the team starts to meld together and work together, you start to be more satisfied with the story and with the plot. So like I said, I read all the way up to book 3, and I started to really start to enjoy the series more, but I still prefer the Sons of Valor series because it is just straightforward, door-kicking action. It was a hell of a ride, and I want more of those books to be published quickly. So after that, I read a thriller, which, like I said before, I don't read too many of them. But I happened to pick up a couple at the library, and I did, and I have been enjoying them. So this is The Wrong Family by Tarryn Fisher. Sorry, it's from the library, so it's shiny. If I leave back, there you go. Tarryn Fisher, The Wrong Family. So this book focuses on 4 main people. You have Winnie and her husband Nigel and their teenage son, and you have an elderly woman named Juno. So Winnie and Nigel and their son live in this older home. It's prime real estate in Seattle, Washington, right across from this great big, huge, massive park. And you start to suspect that Winnie and Nigel, that they're not doing very well. Their marriage is not doing very well. You start to suspect their relationship with their son is not doing very well. And then you have Juno, who is not part of the family. And you see things from her perspective and from Winnie, the mom, the wife, from her perspective. The entire book is told in the third person. And when Winnie and Nigel get into a fight, Nigel throws this accusation in her face, and Juno overhears it. And Juno starts to look into this accusation. She starts to suspect Winnie of a nefarious deed. And in doing so, she starts to unravel this mystery, and which causes the family to start to unravel, and it sets off a series of events. So I enjoyed the book. There were some plot twists that I didn't see coming. I won't go so far as to say it's incredibly unique. I think people who read tons of thrillers, I'm not really sure that this would resonate with you as being excellent. But I mean, leave that for you to decide. But I ended up giving this, I think, a 3.5-star rating because it did keep me interested. I did want to find out what happened. But the jewel of my reading for January was sort of like an accident, I guess. I had gone to the library in the beginning of the month and had gotten quite a few books. But then I got sick and I really didn't feel like reading. So I packed all the books up and put them in a bag by the door to take back to the library because they were due. And then that night, before I was going to take the books back, I clicked on one of Jen Campbell's videos where she was talking about her top reads from last year. And she mentioned one of the books that I had, but I haven't read it yet, or I hadn't read it yet. And so I went ahead and renewed it because Jen Campbell made it sound like it was so good. It was so good. Okay, I read it in less than 24 hours. My kids had finally gone back to school. So in between, like, trying to clean up my house, I was just reading. Okay, so that book is Mrs. March by Feito. So good. Now, this is a psychological thriller. It is entirely character-driven. The plot is just almost like, not an afterthought, but it's just like a subplot. It is not the main drive of the book. So you have the main character, Mrs. March. This is told entirely in the third person and entirely from Mrs. March's perspective. You do not know the time period in which this story takes place. It had sort of a 60s, 70s vibe to me, but I am basing that off of the clothing and sort of just the aura of the book. Like, you don't hear anything about cell phones. She mentions rolling the TV out of the room, which reminded me of my grandparents' old tube TV that was like set inside the furniture. And it just had this old, like, 60s vibe. She always wore gloves and a hat. So anyway, but it didn't feel, but they had like, a few references did make me feel that it was more late 60s. But anyway, so Mrs. March is married to Mr. March. They have an elementary age child, and they are living in like a big sprawling apartment in New York City. And Mr. March is a best-selling author. So from the first few pages, you are able to pick up that Mrs. March is so neurotic. She is constantly worried about the way people perceive her and her family. Everything she does is to make people think a certain thing about her. Everything is about other people's perception of her, what she wears, what she does, everything. So she goes into this bakery that she's been into dozens and dozens of times, and she's thinking about all the wonderful things the patrons must be thinking about her. That she's a wonderful wife, that she's a wonderful mother, just, neurotic. And the shopkeeper mentions her husband's, Mr. March's newest book. Now, Mrs. March has not read this book. She's just sort of flipped through it, but she did not really like the content of it, so she hasn't read it in its entirety. And the shopkeeper, the baker, says, just casually mentions that, oh, Mr. March, Mrs. March, this must be the first time that your husband's based a character off of you. And Mrs. March's world turns upside down. The main character of her husband's book, her name is either Joanne or Joanne, I cannot remember. She's an old, sad whore. Those are Mrs. March's words. So now Mrs. March is humiliated. She does not understand why people would think that about her. The character Joanna, she is pitied and reviled, but she's not aware that people pity her or revile her. So now Mrs. March is she's self-reflecting, and it feels like it's not something she's done much of. And she cannot understand why somebody would say that, why her husband would do that, why somebody would think that. Does her husband think that? Do people think that? And just like pulling the thread on a sweater, it just starts to unravel Mrs. March. So that is what this book is about, the unraveling of Mrs. March. There is a subplot where Mrs. March suspects her husband has committed a crime, and she starts to try to prove that he did, but it is just a subplot. It is not the main drive of the book. Like I said, it is all about the unraveling of Mrs. March. I loved this book. I would, without a doubt, without even reading what the book was about, get another book by this author. Absolutely loved it. So that was my January reading. Now I'm going to talk about a few things that I'm reading right now that will be part of my February wrap up. So I just started this book, I think. Oh! Okay. My cat, I'm so sorry. My cat ran through the legs of the stand. So did you see all my cookbooks stacked up over here with junk on top of them? We haven't put them back. We had Thanksgiving here, so they're all stacked over there in the corner, and my husband keeps adding stuff to the top of the cookbook stack. So anyway, so I just started reading this. It is The Guest List by Lucy Foley. This was on one of the stack outs at the library where the library employees recommend books, and I thought this sounded really interesting. My biggest issue with this at the moment is I'm having a hard time pronouncing the names because they're Irish names, like this one. One of the things I plan on doing today is looking up how to pronounce this, but this name right here, it looks like Aofi to me, but I'm pretty sure that's not it. But I personally have never come across a name like that here in Texas. But anyway, so I'm barely into this, but I think I'm really going to enjoy it. As I mentioned before with that SEAL Team book I was reading, that Middle Eastern history, especially with current events as well, played a predominant part in both of those book series. And there was references to things that I didn't really understand. And so I decided that I wanted to brush up on my Middle Eastern history. I thought about just trying to get one book about the history of the Middle East in its entirety, but I figured that I was going to end up with like a 2,000-page book if I tried to do that, because it is so much territory, so many cultures, and such a long time period to cover. But I did come across this one, and I thought it would contain most of everything that I needed to know. And that is Power, Faith, and Fantasy, and it is America, basically America's involvement in the Middle East from 1776 to the present. So I'm really enjoying this. It's full of really nifty information. There were things in here I'd never heard about. At least to my recollection, I don't remember learning hardly anything about the Middle East when I was in school. So I'm like annotating the hell out of it. If you can see. There's lots of underlining. My husband is so tired of hearing me talk about this book, but I just think it's fascinating. And I think I've gotten up to, so I've gotten, as far as the time period of this goes, I've read up until right before the beginning of World War II. So I'm nearing the end of the book. So I'm enjoying that. And like I said, I'm starting book 7 of the Aurora Teagarden series. I'm pretty sure when I'm done with that, I'm done with the series in its entirety, and I'm going to try to find some other books to listen to on audio. So anyway, like I said, it was sort of a weird hodgepodge month for me. I don't usually read cozy mysteries, and I don't read a ton of thrillers either. So it was a bit of an odd month, but it was a decent reading month. Reading Mrs. March really, really made the month good for me. So I'm really glad that I didn't take that back. So anyway, so check back in. I'm thinking about maybe posting some videos of my top 10 favorite books in a certain genre, but I'm not sure. So yeah, let me know if there's any content that you would like to see. Once again, thank you very much for clicking on my video. If you liked what I've had to say in this video, my previous one, please subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a really lovely day and is staying warm if you're in one of the cold places right now. So bye.